Some bands write hits. Pink Floyd built worlds. That's the difference. A normal hit song gives you a chorus you remember. A Pink Floyd song gives you a room to sit inside. And before we get into this, if you like the stories behind the songs, the studio accidents, the creative fights, the weird little decisions that change rock history, make sure you're subscribed and stick with me, because Pink Floyd is one of those bands where the story behind the record is almost as fascinating as the record itself. And today we're looking at 3 Pink Floyd songs that didn't just become famous. They changed what rock music could be. Not because they were easy, not because they were built for radio, but because they forced people to listen differently. So let me ask you right away, when you think of Pink Floyd, what comes first? The cash registers and money? The children shouting and another brick in the wall? That final guitar solo in Comfortably Numb? Or is it something else entirely? Because with Pink Floyd, the argument never ends. And honestly, that's how you know you're dealing with a legendary band. Let's start with the song that somehow turned a cash register into one of the most recognizable openings in rock history. Money. Now imagine being in the room when Roger Waters brings in this idea. Most bands walk into a studio with a guitar riff, maybe a melody, maybe a chorus. Roger Waters walks in with a rhythm built from cash registers, coins, tearing paper, and mechanical counting sounds. That is not normal behavior. That is either madness or genius. With Pink Floyd, it was usually both. The famous opening of Money came from a tape loop Roger Waters built using recorded money-related sounds. Coins clinking, a cash register ringing, paper tearing, machine-like clicks. And here's what makes it brilliant. It's not just decoration. It's the rhythm. The sound effects become the groove. Now think about that. Most rock songs start with drums. This one starts with capitalism. That's very Pink Floyd. And then there's the time signature. Money is famously built around 7/4 time for much of the song. 7 beats instead of the usual 4. That should feel awkward. It should trip people up. But it doesn't. Why? Because the groove is so strong that most listeners don't even notice the math. They just feel something slightly off, slightly tilted, like the song is walking with a limp. And that's perfect, because the whole song is about greed, excess, and the strange machinery of money. Now here's a question. How many radio hits can you name that are in 7/4 time? Exactly. This song should not have worked as a hit. It should have been too weird, too long, too sarcastic, too musically odd. But that's where Pink Floyd changed the rules. They made strange sound accessible. Now here's something most people miss. Roger Waters originally made a demo version of Money at home in a makeshift setup in his garden shed. That's where the idea starts. Not in some giant, expensive studio. Not with a record executive saying, "We need a single." It starts with a guy building a loop of money sounds and turning it into social commentary. Then the band brings it into Abbey Road Studios. And Abbey Road matters here, because this is the same building where the Beatles had spent years turning the studio into an instrument. Pink Floyd took that idea and pushed it even further into atmosphere, texture, and concept. Now imagine being Alan Parsons, the engineer on the Dark Side of the Moon. You're not just recording a band, you're helping assemble an experience. Every transition matters. Every sound effect matters. Every spoken voice, every heartbeat, every clock, every footstep. And with Money, the challenge is even stranger. How do you take a tape loop of cash register sounds and make it feel musical? Not gimmicky, musical. That's the genius. Now let me ask you something. If a band today told their label, "Our next single starts with a cash register loop in 7/4 time," what do you think the label would say? Probably something unprintable. But Money became Pink Floyd's first major American hit. And that matters. Because The Dark Side of the Moon wasn't built like a singles album. It was built like a journey. And somehow, one of the strangest tracks on it became the doorway for a lot of people. That changed rock history. Because after Money, bands had proof that audiences would follow complexity if the groove was strong enough. You didn't have to dumb the music down. You had to make the weird part irresistible. That's the difference. And Money did that. It made progressive rock commercial without making it simple. Now here's the myth versus reality. The myth is that Pink Floyd were these emotionless studio scientists, coldly assembling soundscapes. The reality? They were making risky creative decisions without knowing if they would work. Money could have sounded ridiculous. Cash registers, coins, odd meter, anti-greed lyrics on an album that would eventually make everyone involved very rich. There's a little irony there, isn't there? But maybe that's why it still works. Because the song understands the contradiction. It mocks money while becoming a money-making machine. Only Pink Floyd could pull that off with a straight face. Now let's move to a song that became so famous, people sometimes forget how strange its story really is. Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2. Now this is the Pink Floyd song everybody knows. Even people who don't know Pink Floyd know this one. We don't need no education. That line became a cultural weapon. Kids loved it. Parents panicked. Teachers were not exactly sending thank you notes. But here's the funny part. The song wasn't originally designed to become a disco-flavored protest anthem with a children's choir. That came from producer Bob Ezrin. And this is where producer influence becomes huge. Roger Waters had the concept. The wall, isolation, childhood trauma, authority, emotional barriers. But Bob Ezrin heard something in Another Brick in the Wall that could become bigger. He suggested giving it a stronger groove, a more danceable feel, almost disco adjacent. Now think about that, Pink Floyd and disco. That sounds wrong on paper, but the late 70s were a different world. Disco was everywhere. Radio was changing. Rock bands could either ignore that shift, fight it, or absorb it. Pink Floyd absorbed just enough of it to create something dangerous. Because the groove pulls you in, then the message hits. And once the children's voices arrive, forget it. The record becomes unforgettable. Now let's talk about those children. The choir came from Islington Green School in London. Bob Ezrin wanted children's voices because the song was about school, authority, and rebellion. That sounds obvious now, but at the time it was a bold production decision. Imagine being Roger Waters and hearing those children's voices played back for the first time. Your concept album about alienation suddenly has real kids shouting back at the system. That changes everything. And here's where the story gets complicated. The children were not originally given proper royalties the way people later believed they should have been. The school received a payment, and the kids received some perks. But the bigger royalty issue became a controversy years later. Now let me ask you something. If your childhood voice ended up on one of the most famous rock records ever made, what would you expect? A thank you? A royalty check? A framed gold record? At least a decent sandwich? This is where rock history gets messy. Because iconic moments often happen before anyone realizes how iconic they'll become. At the time, it's a session. Later, it becomes history. And by then, everybody starts asking who got paid. Now here's another fascinating thing. Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2 became Pink Floyd's only #1 single in both the United States and the UK. Think about that. This band made Wish You Were Here, Time, Comfortably Numb, Money, Shine on You Crazy Diamond, and their biggest chart single is the one with school children chanting against education. That is hilarious and perfect. But the song is often misunderstood. People hear, "We don't need no education," and assume the song is anti-learning. It isn't. It's anti-abuse, anti-humiliation, anti-authoritarian control. It's about a school system that crushes individuality. That's a very different thing. And if you've ever had a teacher who made you feel small, you understand this song immediately. That's why it connected. Not because kids hated learning, because a lot of people recognize the feeling of being controlled by someone who had power over them. Now here's a question. Was this song rebellious because of the lyrics? Or because real children were singing them? Because I think that's what made it dangerous. If Roger Waters sings those lines alone, it's a critique. When children sing them, it becomes an uprising. That is a producer decision changing rock history. Bob Ezrin understood drama. He understood theater. And The Wall is basically rock theater. Not just an album, a psychological movie without the screen. And Another Brick in the Wall became the moment the entire concept escaped the album and entered the culture. You didn't need to understand Pink, the character. You didn't need to know the story of The Wall. You just needed to hear those kids. And you got it. That's what a great single does. It carries the whole idea in one unforgettable moment. Now think about what this did for rock. It proved that a concept album could produce a massive pop hit without abandoning the concept. That's hard. Most concept albums don't produce giant singles because the songs depend too much on the full story. But this one worked both ways. Inside the album, it's part of Pink's psychological collapse. Outside the album, it's a universal rebellion song. That's why it changed history. It made art rock unavoidable on pop radio. Now let's move to the song that may be Pink Floyd's emotional masterpiece, Comfortably Numb. This is not their biggest chart hit, but culturally, it might be their most powerful song. And if you ask guitar players, this is holy ground. But the story behind it is not just about guitar. It's about conflict. Roger Waters versus David Gilmour. Two creative visions. Two ways of hearing the same song. And honestly, one of the last moments where they were still able to meet in the middle. The music began as a David Gilmour demo. He had worked on it during sessions around his first solo album, but he didn't use it there. Later, it becomes part of The Wall. Roger Waters writes lyrics based partly on a real experience. He had been given tranquilizers for stomach cramps before a Pink Floyd show in Philadelphia in 1977. He had to perform while feeling detached from his own body. He later described it as a miserable experience, being physically present but emotionally and mentally numb. Now stop there. That is a terrifying idea. Performing for thousands of people while feeling like you're not really inside yourself. Have you ever had a moment where you were going through the motions, doing what everyone expected, but inside you felt completely disconnected? That's comfortably numb, and that's why it hits so hard. It's not just about drugs. It's not just about fame. It's about dissociation, alienation, the terrifying calm of not feeling anything at all. Now here's where the studio conflict comes in. Gilmour wanted one kind of arrangement. Waters wanted another. Gilmour leaned toward a more stripped-down rock feel. Waters wanted orchestration, drama, theatrical scale. They argued, because of course they did. By this point, Pink Floyd was not exactly a friendship picnic. The creative tension inside the band was getting worse. But somehow, on Comfortably Numb, the tension works. They compromise. They combine elements of both visions. And that compromise becomes one of the greatest recordings in rock history. Now let me ask you, is conflict sometimes necessary for greatness? Because nobody wants to live inside a band argument. But some songs only exist because two people wanted different things badly enough to fight for them. That's what Comfortably Numb sounds like. A cold, theatrical verse. A warm, soaring chorus. A guitar solo that feels like it breaks through the wall completely. Waters gives you the psychological cage. Gilmour gives you the escape. That's the song. Now let's talk about that guitar solo. Actually, two solos. The first one is beautiful. The second one is legendary. David Gilmour doesn't play fast for the sake of speed. He doesn't bury you in notes. He bends one note and makes it feel like it has a whole life behind it. That's the difference. Some guitarists impress you. Gilmour makes you stop breathing for a second. And here's what makes the solo work so well. It arrives after emotional numbness, after detachment, after the doctor voice, after Pink is being pushed back on stage. So when the guitar finally opens up, it feels like the emotion the character can't say. That is storytelling through guitar, not decoration. Storytelling. Now imagine if that solo had been flashy. Imagine if Gilmour had tried to show off. It would have ruined the song. The restraint is the point. Every note feels chosen. Every bend feels like it matters. Now here's the live performance part. During the Wall concerts, a massive wall was built across the stage. And during Comfortably Numb, Roger Waters performed below as the doctor, while David Gilmour appeared above the wall, elevated, singing and playing guitar from the top. That staging matters. It makes the split visual. Waters below in the world of control and medication. Gilmour above, almost like the voice of release. Can you imagine being in that audience? You've watched the wall go up all night. You're staring at this giant barrier. Then suddenly, Gilmour appears above it, guitar in hand, and that solo begins. That's not just a concert moment. That's rock theater at its highest level. And this is why Pink Floyd changed rock history. They didn't just ask, how do we play the song live? They asked, how do we make the audience feel the meaning of the song? That is a different level of thinking. Now here's the myth versus reality. The myth is that Comfortably Numb is just a song about drugs. The reality is deeper. It's about performance, emotional shutdown, medical numbness, fame, control, and the terrifying possibility that you can become so disconnected from yourself that numbness starts to feel normal. That's why the song lasts. Because everybody understands numbness eventually. Maybe not in the same way Waters did. Maybe not on a stage. Maybe not under lights. But everyone knows what it feels like to check out emotionally just to get through something. That's why Comfortably Numb still hits. Not because it's old, because it's honest. When you step back and look at these three songs together, you see Pink Floyd's genius from three different angles. Money changed rock by proving strange studio ideas and odd time signatures could become commercial. Another brick in the wall changed rock by turning a concept album into a worldwide protest anthem. Comfortably Numb changed rock by proving a guitar solo could be emotional storytelling at the highest level. 3 songs, 3 different revolutions. Sound design, cultural rebellion, emotional architecture. That's Pink Floyd. They weren't just writing songs, they were designing experiences. And that is why they belong in the greatest band conversation. Not because they sounded like everyone else, because they made everyone else rethink what was possible. So now I want to know what you think. Did we get the top 3 right? Would you swap in Wish You Were Here? Time? Shine on You Crazy Diamond? Breathe? Drop your Pink Floyd top 3 in the comments. I know this one is going to start a debate. And if you're just here to sit back, let the clocks tick, the cash registers ring, and the guitar solos float through the room, relax and spark one up. Keep that turntable spinning.